Good evening, Chesterfield County, and thank you for joining us here tonight for the second of our three-part series of virtual budget town halls as we look at the proposed operating budget for the 2021-2022 school year. Good evening. My name is Tim Bullis, and I have the privilege of working with the Communications and Community Engagement team with Chesterfield County Public Schools, and I'll be serving as your moderator tonight with our fantastic panel of experts and elected school board members. We want to take time, first of all, to thank you for making time in your schedule to join us here tonight. This is obviously a very critical discussion for Chesterfield County Public Schools and for the Chesterfield County School Board. The discussions that we'll have over the next 6 months will actually start to shape our next school year. This operating budget will fund operations for the 2021-2022 school year. It will provide funds that will keep our lights on, it will fund our transportation, and it will fund our instruction. But as you'll hear throughout the evening, one of the main themes for this is making sure that we fund our staff. We have very high quality staff, some of the best teachers in the country, and we want to make sure that they come to Chesterfield and that they stay in Chesterfield. And so for the first time in about 15 years, we're taking a very hard look at teacher compensation, and we have a salary study that we'll go over and recommend and some initiatives related to that. So again, thank you for joining us here tonight. Tonight is the Midlothian District and Clover Hill District Town Hall meeting. Again, this is our opportunity to share information with you, the residents of Chesterfield County, about our operating budget proposal. During the next 6 weeks, the school board will take time to go through this proposal, ask questions, they will seek presentations to help them learn more, and they will continue to engage with the community about the priorities that the community has for Chesterfield County Public Schools and public education within our community. Part of that process includes helping inform and educate our public, and that's why we're here tonight. You will learn more about the budget, you will learn ways to advocate for our students and for our staff members, and then we'll go through the presentation, and then we'll answer some of your questions. Thank you for those who submitted the questions via the Google form that was sent out to our families. We have a number of those to go through, and as we do that, we'll be monitoring the social media feeds and we'll be pulling questions off of there too. I would like to note that tonight's meeting is about the proposed operating budget for the 2021-22 school year. There are a number of questions already submitted. We anticipate a number of questions will be posted in the chat. And so we will be limiting our questions tonight to the proposed operating budget. We've had a number of opportunities to talk about other events, such as the return to school, and we will continue to talk about that in different formats. But tonight is going to be focused on the operating budget. We want to make sure that we get this right for the coming school year. So again, with no further ado, we're going to begin to recognize our panelists who have taken time to join us here tonight. On my right, which is your left, we have Josh Davis, who is our Chief Operations Officer. Sitting next to him is Bob Meister, our Chief Financial Officer. Representing the Clover Hill District on the school board, Dot Heffron. Our Superintendent, Dr. Merv Doherty. To my left, your right, the Midlothian District Representative, Catherine Haynes. Our Deputy Superintendent, Dr. Thomas Taylor. And our Chief of Schools, Dr. Lisa High. Again, we realize that there's a lot of competition for time, and so we sincerely appreciate your willingness to join us here tonight to learn more about our future and our future plans. Just a quick note, we will be keeping our masks on as we answer these questions. So if you have an accommodation that needs to be taken into account for hearing or visual purposes, please do activate the closed captioning feature in Facebook and YouTube. We will endeavor to be as clear as we can. All of us have practiced and gone through some drills, so we believe that we're ready for tonight. With that, we'll go through the quick agenda for tonight. Our superintendent and Mr. Meister, our chief financial officer, will go through an abbreviated presentation. Earlier this week, Dr. Doherty presented his proposed operating budget to the school board. You'll be glad to hear that we're not going through all 107 slides tonight. We've got it whittled down to closer to about 75. But we'll go through that presentation and then we'll jump right into questions. And we hope to tackle all of them that have been submitted and all of the budget-related questions that get posted in our social media feed as well. With that, Dr. Doherty, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Bullis. And we will go through our PowerPoint slide. Next slide. So we have two priorities for our budget for this year in the presentation. Priority one, addressing teacher compensation. You will hear this over and over again. This is our number one priority. This is a must, in our opinion, to continue the outstanding education that we have in our school system. We have outstanding teachers. They do outstanding work. We see that in our results and every day and at the end of the year. And we want to continue to keep Chesterfield as a top priority educational school district. Priority number 2 is meeting the needs of our students and in our schools and our staff. And we know that we have a diverse learning community, but we also know that our students are coming back face to face, and we'll have to look at instruction and closing instructional gaps, looking at social and emotional issues, mental health issues, dealing with trauma, and just dealing with the things that we have seen over the past 10 to 11 months with the pandemic. So we're looking at CCPS, and one thing, if you didn't know, that Chesterfield has changed over the last 2 decades, and we are now a majority school district. As you can see in the numbers and the changes that have occurred, we are more of a melting pot now of our country, which is exciting. We have over 101 languages in our schools, and we are excited about the opportunities to meet the needs of our diverse learners. And just along with that, since 2010, our enrollment's changed somewhat, and when you look at this, 55% of our students are now have increased to 55%. So we were at in 2010 to 2024, that increase has been 55%. 141% increase during that same time period with English language learners, and 9% increase with the students with disabilities. And when you notice this information here, it also allows us to say that we need additional staff, as you've seen us work on in the last several years, to make sure that we meet the needs of our students, that all of our students, no matter what zip code they come from, receive a quality education and are going to be successful as they leave Chesterfield in their career and their higher education needs. So if you notice, when we talk about free and reduced lunch, that's a family of 4, and they just make a little over $34,000. Recently, our numbers showed that we were 38% of our student population qualified for this. That was more students than the total number of student enrollment in the Richmond public schools. And we do believe that number will go up to 40 to 41% this coming year. And this is extremely important because our free and reduced lunch population is throughout our school district. So all 5 magisterial districts deal with rates of free and reduced lunch students. So our challenge is ahead. And we know that we're going to deal with 10 months of our students dealing with COVID, and we want to address these issues to the best of our ability. And we know that we'll be looking at students as they return face-to-face full-time with us, that they're going to deal with a great deal of academic issues, social-emotional issues, and mental health concerns that we've started to address by staffing we had for this year alone by adding additional counselors, mental health workers, additional academic support, and looking at our special ed and EL populations as well. We also know that we have more speakers of other languages. Like I said, 101 languages, and that population is increasing greatly. Our special ed population is a little over 14%, and our ESL population is a little over 14% in our school district. And in special education, we know that IEP rules and laws have changed, and we must make sure that we meet the needs with additional staff to make sure that all of our students have a quality education. And we know we're going to deal with students with health and wellness issues. That isolation time has compounded the issue, and we want to make sure that we have healthy students not only in school but out of school. Our mental health concerns, we know that we've had a great deal of success in training our staff in trauma-informed care and mental health needs, but we are going to have to make sure that we have staff and we have the needs, not only working in our schools, but also in our community and working with our county to make sure that we meet the needs of these students and these concerns immediately. And as we talked about, we do a lot of threat assessment, and we know those numbers will increase. There could be a large increase, and we want to make sure that none of our students cause self-harm to themselves, and we want to make sure that we meet their needs and we have people there for them. A great need for us is making sure that not only do we keep high-quality teachers, but we can hire additional higher-quality teachers. You know, this is one of the largest factors in a student's success, and that classroom teacher does amazing things for our students. They're there every day. We're in a very competitive market, and we must continue to recruit and retain the very best. The problem is our salary scale right now does not do that, and we are losing quality teachers to other professions and other school divisions. We also believe that differentiated support for our schools is extremely important, and we do not want to look at the minimal standards of Virginia. We want to make sure that we offer the needs of success by adding additional supportive staff. A great example, as you'll hear a little bit later, but I love talking about it, is in 2016, Ettrick Elementary School did not meet the accreditation standards. And because the school district offered additional support within the school to help with the student needs and help the staff, within a 2-year period, 2018, they became a National Distinguished Title I school in 2 years. That's an amazing feat in any educational setting, and it's because we offered the appropriate staff. And so before we get to schools that aren't accredited, we want to go ahead and meet the needs of our students now. So again, as I said, you will hear this over and over again. Number one priority is addressing teacher compensation. And I will say this, and I will say it again. If we do not meet this need, I would consider this budget a failure, because we have failed our students and we have failed our teachers by not meeting this need. And priority number two, meeting the needs of our students and staff. So someone says, well, why would I offer a needs-based budget knowing that I may not get all the funding? Well, the Virginia Code section 22.1-92 basically gives me the responsibility that by the superintendent and to prepare a budget of need to present to the school board and then to present to the, which was our county, and which is our board of supervisors. My responsibility is to look at the need of the school district and present the needs of the school district so the school board can make the decisions on moving the budget forward. So what is the process for this? Well, first of all, in November, we have a budget, our budget planning begins. And then in December, we get the governor proposed state budget. And off of the budget planning and off of the proposed budget, it allows us to start looking at the needs of our school district. And we ask each department to look at the opportunities that we have and what they need. And I will say this, and please note that our budget request from last year to this year did not change. If it was a need last year, then it was a need this year. And so when we looked at the superintendent's proposed budget, which is now in January and into February, what will occur is that the school board has an opportunity to see the budget, to vet the budget, to ask questions, to get your input. And at the end of this month, they will vote on an approved budget that they feel is needed for our school district. And then in March, move it to the Board of Supervisors, which we are asking for their approval, and also then moves to get state approval with guidelines that we have. And then also, that's in March. And then in April, what we see is the adoption of the approval of the school board budget from the Board of Supervisors and the state. So one of the things that is unchanged is our LCI, our local composite index. Last year, the state recalculated all the school divisions and counties, their local composite, and the value of education in the system, and what the state would pay and what the county would pay. And the value did not change. It's based on real estate value, adjusted gross income, and tax retail sales. So not a lot to discuss here because the LCI did not change. So the following, like I said earlier, our objectives have not changed from last school year. We think they're important. The longer we push these down the road, the more expensive they become to implement. We know there's a national teacher shortage. Chesterfield County has not recovered from the market crash of 2018. That is evident in the budget that we have now. We know there's only a certain amount of money available to support this, and we believe that the money that is received by the county is adequate enough to support the budget. Very little has changed in the sense of when you look at our budget request, except for one major piece, which is the teacher pay scale, and how do we adjust it. But we know that there's other things we have to look at. We know that we have to be competitive in our market, and we understand that the needs of our county, when we look at students, parents, community, the workforce, everything that we deal with involves and affects Chesterfield County. And we have to continue to realize that education is a driving force. Everyone listening, no matter what your job is or career is, you had teachers to get you there. And we want to continue the success that you've had and the success of our students have had over the past to make sure that our students leave with high quality education and high quality experiences for a career. And we are required with mandates. We are required with state mandates and federal mandates. But we do not want to just meet the minimum of the mandates. We want to exceed the expectations that the state has for staffing of schools to make sure our students have quality teachers and quality support. And that quality support is meaningful with our very diverse population and also the size of our population of, over 60,000 students. And we want to make sure that we are allocated correctly to meet the needs of all of our staff and all of our support people. And one of the issues is teacher salary. So according to the Virginia Education Association, teacher pay in Virginia ranks 33rd in this country, 33rd. The average teacher salary in Virginia is $53,267. That's a little over $9,000 below the national teacher average. I want you to remember that statement of what the total is going to be. And we have to look at what is occurring because by the lack of compensation for teachers, we see teachers going into other professions and going to districts that are willing to pay for proper compensation of work. So a first-year teacher in Chesterfield County makes $45,792. The national average for teacher salary is $61,730. A Chesterfield County teacher is not paid the national average until they get to year 31 in their service. So it takes 31 years to get to the national average, and that's not acceptable. And so now I'd like to turn this over to Bob Meister, who is our CFO, and you will continue to hear the theme, how important teacher compensation is to make sure your child has a quality educator and they get a quality education in Chesterfield County. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Dr. Doherty. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to the community today. I'd like to start my part of the discussion by talking about how Chesterfield County stacks up, how we compare to other similar districts across the Commonwealth. I'll start with a view from the Department of Education's annual school report. This looks at costs to compare on a per pupil basis. So what you see here is Chesterfield for the categories of administration, attendance, health. You can think about that as admin, central office. We cost about $404 per pupil. If you look at the state average, that's $707. So we're significantly below state average and below all of our competing or comparable districts. Operations and maintenance. Dr. Doherty alluded to our infrastructure and our buildings that are serving our students very well, but they're old. And even with those old buildings, our operations and maintenance cost lags both the state and the localities that we compete with. $874 per student, state average close to $1,200. I'm sure Mr. Davis to my right here would be happy to see that go up so we can have better facilities for our kids. Pupil transportation. Here we look a little bit closer to middle of the pack, $650 thereabouts per pupil. Still lags state average. We have made some significant investments in this area to push this forward. We'd still like to get closer to that state average, but less of a laggard here. Instruction. I'll pause for a minute on this one. We're about $8,000 per pupil. State average is closer to $9,700, $9,800. This is the metric where most of what Dr. Doherty talked about in terms of teacher compensation really comes into play. These are really the classroom costs, right? These are the costs where the fact that we are underpaying our teachers versus market averages really plays forward. We're at about $8,000. You can see the state average all the way up at $9,700. Really fantastic results, and let's think about return on investment for a second. 100% accreditation, really great experiences for our kids, but we're doing it on a shoestring budget, especially in the instruction area. That's great ROI, but it's not a sustainable model. It's one of the things we need to address this year in the budget. The last slide I'll show on sort of this per pupil is the regular day school. That's the sum of all the above. So if you take the admin down through instruction, we lag pretty much all the comparables. We're at just under $10,000 on a per pupil expenditure. State average is all the way up at $12,400. So when we talk about being underfunded for our kids, this is one of the key areas and the key metrics we look at to say, yeah, when you look at competitors, we are in fact lagging. Although we are delivering great results for our kids, it's not necessarily a sustainable model. One reason for that, if you look at this looks at, again, on a per pupil basis, the contribution from these various localities, county or city governments. So you can see here, Chesterfield, we get about $4,000, a little bit more per pupil from the county. You look at other districts in the area or comparables, you look at the state average, all but Norfolk in this particular comparable are above, sometimes meaningfully above where Chesterfield is. So we believe ultimately that we as a community can do better and better fund our schools through the county and other sources. Our focal points. Once again, you've heard Dr. Doherty present this slide a couple times. I won't dwell on it, but I will stress once again that addressing teacher decompression remains and is our top priority in this budget. And as he said, I'll say it again, if this does not land in the budget, if we fail to deliver this to our staff, it will be a failure on our part to land this budget. Other priorities that we talked about here must also be kept in mind as well, including meeting the needs of our students and staff. Why is teaching so important? You can pull any of thousands of quotes to do this. We like this one. Teaching is a profession that creates all other professions. Without teaching, where would we all be? What would we look at? This is a really crucial piece of the overall puzzle. So now with that in mind, I will start talking a little bit about the salary study that has been alluded to already. So what we did last year, we proposed a fix, if you will, for the salary decompression. The county opted to fund a third-party salary survey. And what we're going to show you is the results, and what this recommendation we're putting in front of the community now really mirrors what that third-party salary survey suggests. So what did they find? First off, starting teacher pay rates in Chesterfield are a little bit below, but they're generally comparable to market average, but they widen as long as the teachers stay with the county. So what that means, over a 35-year career, a CCPS teacher with a master's degree will earn roughly 10% less than market average. That'll equate to about $240,000 over the course of a career. That's a lot of money. This is not just a teacher issue. There are other areas where this impacts, and we'll address those through time, but we'll talk mostly about teachers here today. One of the other things we did as part of this salary study is we went out and talked to our teachers and took a survey and tried to understand some of their motivations. And what three big questions we looked at was, why do they come? Why do you stay? Why do you leave? So the first question gets to, why do you come to work as a teacher in Chesterfield? The two biggest reasons that were mentioned were location and reputation. I'd like to note that salary was not among even the top three reasons to join the CCPS team. Why do teachers stay? The most frequently cited reasons were the coworkers, working with other great teachers, and the location were the two most cited reasons. Less than 5%, very few of our teachers cited pay or compensation as a reason to stay. Lastly, why do teachers leave? The two things that pop to the top is better salary now and better opportunity for salary in the future were the top two reasons. And that occurred on roughly 80% of the respondents. So why do people come here? Why do they stay? Location, reputation, great coworkers. Why do they leave? Salary. What's a really big problem in teaching is maintaining and retaining great teachers. So this really puts us behind the eight ball. What does that look like on a dollar basis? What this shows is, if you look at the green line, that's the Chesterfield County School for a master's pay lane, what our teachers pay looks like. You can see stays relatively flat before eventually starting to increase in about year 15 or year 16. The line above that is the market average. You can see a nice steady progression there. You'll notice that we start off in roughly the same spot, but over those first 10 or 15 years, our pay stays relatively flat while the market average continues to increase, creating that sizable gap that I mentioned earlier, that 10% over a career. So what does that look like in terms of dollars? Just one example here. An average teacher will start out at about $45,000, $45,800 in the first year. After 5 years, that'll increase 3%, or about $1,300. And after 10 years, it's only 6% higher at about $2,800. Quite frankly, that's not good enough, especially when you consider about 2/3 of our teachers are, quite frankly, in their first 10 years, and retaining teachers in that first 5 to 7 years is really, really critical, and that's when teachers most likely leave the field if they are going to. So what does the recommendation look like? The consultants came back and told us, yeah, there's gaps here. You just saw some of them, and we think you should address it across 3 different phases. Phase 1 is what we're talking to you today about in the FY22 budget, and really looking at this, starting salaries, yes, there is a minor adjustment in here, but that's not the big focus of this. It's really that second piece, which is remedying pay compression. This is about creating a pay scale that makes sense and ensuring our teachers are put on the right spot on that scale. If you look at that, that is about a 6.2% increase in salary for our teachers. Phase 2 and Phase 3 starts to address more of the competitiveness on the front end, as well as continuing to advance those teachers up that scale. There is another phase that this consultant did not study, which is all those really critical piece of the Chesterfield County that weren't part of this study. The study focused, as I said, mainly on teachers, mainly on administrators within the school. What it did not cover was folks like bus drivers, food service workers, other support staff that are really crucial to ensure that Chesterfield County continues to run and run well. While not listed here, it's fully in our perspective as staff, and I think it's the board's recommendations as well, is that this is not just a 3-phase thing. There's a 4th phase to address those other positions as well that was not part of the study. So that all sounds great, but there's a price tag to all this, right? And that's where ultimately the money hits the rubber hits the road. Year 1 of this study, as I mentioned, it's mostly a teacher thing. School administrators, support personnel, et cetera, are also captured here and is a very important piece of the pie. Year 1, this comes with about a $23 million price tag. That includes salaries, benefits, et cetera. Year 2, year 3, as we phase this in, it becomes a little bit smaller over time, but I must reiterate that this is $23 million, at least in year 1, not as a one-time cost in just this year and then it goes away like a bonus. This is a cost that continues throughout the life. So this is something that we'll need to consider, not just funding in year 1, but we find a sustainable source for it for both year 2, year 3, et cetera, and down the line. One of the other big things that Dr. Doherty talked about in terms of priorities and what we ultimately want to accomplish is around differentiating support for our schools, right? No 2 schools are the same, just like no 2 people are the same, and making sure that we are doing everything we can to meet the individual needs of each of those schools. The first piece of that is what we call differentiated support. So in this budget, we're asking for about $3 million to really provide differentiated funding to really address those different needs of the schools. I have a few examples on the next slide that I'll talk about really quickly. If you look at this sheet, this gives examples at each of the main levels, elementary, middle, and high. If you look at the elementary schools as an example, last year, the current fiscal year, Bensley, as an example, got about $35,000 based on their 600 or so students. Weaver got about $4,200 based on their 621 students. So a little bit higher, but really only due to the fact that there were more students at Weaver. If you look at the composition of those schools, however, you will notice that Bensley has a higher percentage of folks that are economically disadvantaged and a higher percentage of folks that require those English language learner teachers and support. So you add extra support for those students, and you can look in the total line there. Bensley will enter next year, if this budget is approved, at about $76,000, up from the $34,000. And Weaver Still needs more support, right? But goes from 42,000 to 57,000. So you see a much greater support for Bensley, who definitely has different needs. Similar dynamics play across the middle school and high school examples. You can find all the schools listed in our documents online as well. The other really important piece of differentiating funding is not just on the dollars we provide each schools, but also on the staffing that goes into those schools. This proposal would offer about $1.5 million to fund roughly 21 or 22 FTEs to really differentiate support in those schools that have higher academic, social, emotional, or mental health needs. So what does that look like? Why do we do that? Dr. Doherty already gave the key case study here, right? Ettrick, 2016, were denied accreditation. So what did we do? We did an early version of differentiated staffing and really plugged additional resources into Ettrick, and it made a difference in just 2 short years. By 2018, we were recognized, Ettrick was, as a National Title I distinguished school. As Dr. Doherty said, absolutely unheard of results and fantastic, and just is proof that at the end of the day, this differentiated support works. So thinking about the budget, what does this all ultimately add up to? So I must stress that this is the budget to fund operations. This is instruction, this is operations and maintenance, this is support staff. What this doesn't cover is we get certain funds from the federal government in form of grant that helps support this. We get a separate fund for things like food service that supports that. We're going to talk about that at a later point in the process. This is really to fund the nuts and bolts of the operation. And it's really there to meet community expectations, state guidelines, and really to serve our staff and students. So in order to talk about a budget, we need to talk about revenue first. You'll notice here that there's a lot of numbers on here. It wouldn't be a finance presentation if I didn't show something with a lot of numbers. Our county transfer, this current year, we got just under $311 million. The proposal we've gotten from the county is for that to increase about 2.5% or $8.2 million to $319.9 million. Our local revenue, these are revenues that we as a school system collect for things like parking fees, Chromebook fees, et cetera. We anticipate that going down a bit in next year as we've walked away from Chromebook fees for very obvious reasons given the pandemic. State funds, the next 2 lines, both state and sales tax, if you put those together, we anticipate that's going to increase by about $10 million if you add those up. So you put that all together, and that's about a $16 million increase, or about 2% of our budget. $16 million sounds like a lot of money, but when you're talking about a $700 million base, ultimately it's not. And if you remember some of the needs we've talked about, we quickly exceed the $16 million that we're seeing in revenue. But by how much? This is one of the money slides, if you will. The revenue, we're up $16 million in this proposed budget, as I just discussed. On the expenditure side, our needs-based budget is currently sitting at about $759 million, or a $55.6 million increase from FY21, based on sort of 3 big things, right? One is the $25 million or so for the compensation study, another $16 million for what we call non-discretionary increases. These are contractual or other investments that are largely required either because we already have the service or it's just a natural inflationary thing. And lastly, there's enhancements. I think I already gave you a couple of really sound examples of enhancements. This would be things like that differentiated staffing, and I'll talk about each of these a little bit more as we go forward. You don't have to be a math expert to look at this and go 55 is greater than 16. That leaves us with a deficit of $39.6 million that we are staring at right now, and we recognize that there's fiscal realities here that we'll need to do things as a staff and with the board, and quite frankly with the board of supervisors, to do everything we can to close that gap to ensure that we deliver, quite frankly, as much of this proposed budget as we absolutely can. One thing to keep in mind as we go through this, we call it a fund balance. So what we were fortunate enough, odd to say in the face of a pandemic, but it really led to the ability for us to save a fair amount of money last year. What that has led to is a sizable fund balance at the county. The way this works is we as a school district aren't allowed to sort of hold funds at the end of the year. So the fact that we came in under budget last year allowed us to return a meaningful amount of dollars to the county. We did a few things with that, including the bonus at the end of the year, et cetera, but we still have close to $24 million at the county that's available for us to help contribute to at least some of the deficit. But I must articulate that this is not necessarily an ongoing source of funds. This is a one-time occurrence. We're happy to have this fund balance, but we must remember that this isn't necessarily a sustainable dollar amount going forward. So I've only got a few minutes left here. I've got a lot of different budget items. I'll try to run through these quickly to ensure you guys have a good understanding of what makes up both the staff compensation, non-discretionary, and enhancement piece of the budget so that we can get to your questions, quite frankly. So staff compensation, I talked a lot about this. Year one of this is $23.2 million. The other thing I must articulate is we're not forgetting about those who weren't studied as part of this compensation study. We would like to at least put forward a 2% salary increase for those bus drivers, food service workers, et cetera, that were not covered as part of this, and that would be about a $2 million cost. Non-discretionary items, as I mentioned, these are items that we really don't have much ultimately choice in, or their services we're already providing to you in the community and to our children. Our VRS system increases a little bit every year. Healthcare typically increases 4 to 5%. We'll take the high end of that this year at about 2.4 million, just given all of the uncertainties in the pandemic. Debt service will increase about 2 million. This is essentially the mortgage payment we make on either school construction projects or major maintenance or leases, et cetera. This takes our debt service from about 58 million, or about 8% of our budget, to 60 million in total. Naturally, utilities will go up a little bit. We're putting in a new school. School counselors, instructional aides, nurses, and ESL. I'll talk about all these as one. Most of these, well, all of these are positions that we put in this current calendar year or in fiscal year, and we quite frankly, we leverage CARES dollars to ensure that we met the needs of our students this year through that. So you can see a number of FTEs here and a fairly large dollar amount associated with that. As you all know, CARES dollars is not an ongoing thing. So there's a point in time where we have to roll those positions into our operating budget, and that time is now. Every couple years, the county goes back and looks at their shared services. Those increased a little bit by $700,000 for, these are for things like police, accounting, IT, audit, et cetera. Custodial costs. You've seen a lot of the great work that we've done and Josh Davis's team has done to really make sure our buildings are clean. That comes with some hard decisions. Some of those hard decisions include looking at the custodial crews and the contracts that we have and making sure that they are incented to do the right things and really ensure that the cleanliness is met. And that comes with, in addition to sort of normal year over year inflationary costs, but about a $2 million increase. We continue to make additional contributions to things like SRP. Children's Services Act is a expected funding level for that. Modest adjustments to grant funds. HR software and ADA costs. There's a number of software and technology investments as you go through here. HR happens to be the first one we get to. This is about 100,000 of this 151,000 to really help move our HR infrastructure and our HR technology forward and digitizing HR records, et cetera. We've gotten numerous audit findings, not just on HR, finance, everywhere across, about our technology. We need to invest in our technology and bring us into the quite frankly, the 20th century. We won't even talk about the 21st century. We're putting in a new school next year, Mosley Elementary School. We need some principal and clerical support there before we open. Some modest increases in regional tuition. Transportation. We have traditionally under-budgeted overtime and have looked over the course of the year and scratched and clawed to find those dollars. We want to actually budget the actual cost of overtime this year. Fuel and maintenance, modest increase here. If you look at the size of this would only be about a penny a gallon based on the number of miles we drove, so we're not looking at a major increase in cost there. Tyler Drive, this is a second example of some of that great software we put in. We spent some CARES dollars to put tablets in each of our buses to improve routing and ability to track and understand what's happening on those buses. That comes with an annual cost. That's about $165,000. And the last of these, we have a $40,000 state mandate for sanitary napkins in our female restrooms. In the last couple minutes, I'll talk about other enhancements. The two big ones of these I spent some time on already. This $4.5 million on this page really is for that differentiated staffing those additional people to put in those buildings to help deliver the results like we saw at Ettrick. School-based funding, that's about $3 million to deliver those differential funds to each of our schools. Another exciting enhancement that we're proposing this year is to include school-based annual substitutes. This would be a multi-year plan to ensure that we have a school-based substitute in each school. That comes with about a $600,000 price tag in the first year. Payroll system, another software upgrade that we really need to consider strongly. Maintenance staffing, I'll throw these relatively quickly. As we continue to clean buildings, we continue to work really hard to ensure our buildings are up to snuff. We need to ensure that we're staffing those appropriately. PSAT, SAT for all. There's other ones on here, but I'll talk about that one for a second at $148,000. This is a service that we provide to our students that was generously funded by donations in the past. That donation sort of has run out, so we need to either make a decision to continue that service at about $148,000, or quite frankly discontinue it, or maybe continue to knock on doors and see if we can find other people to fund it. Technology support, nothing says the need for technology support like what we've gone through in the last several months. Translation and interpretation, Dr. Doherty talked about the needs for English language learners. That comes with the need to communicate in those 101 different languages, and we've been underfunded in this bucket for a long time as well. We continue to push for improved stipends for those teachers who are doing things over and above their normal day job. We're putting funds in the budget to help support that. Preventative maintenance, major maintenance. I mentioned old buildings. We needed to continue to invest in both the preventative and the upgrades on those major maintenance activities like HVAC and other systems. I'm sure Mr. Davis would be happy to talk about those. And a handful of other items that I won't spend a ton of time on. PPE is listed here. We don't know what the world's going to look like next year. We want to make sure that we have funds available to ensure that we meet masks and other safety needs of our schools, assuming the pandemic doesn't totally go away. You'll notice some digital curriculum expansion and elementary decodable text, continuing to invest in the digital technology as well. That was a lot to run through. I ran through it relatively quickly, but it still adds up to about a $39.6 million deficit. And I will stress that despite that deficit, it remains Dr. Doherty and I believe the board's top priority to ensure that we deliver the staff compensation adjustments that we've talked about here today. That's $25 million of this gap, and that's really what we need to ensure that we lean into and work to fund. Just a few really quick slides to wind this up. Taking a step back, where does our revenue come from? You remember the graph I showed? Just to put that graphically, about 44% comes from the county. More than half comes from the state. A small piece comes from local, about 1%. There's another sliver that's less than 1% from the federal in this particular budget. Where do we spend money on? We're a people-heavy and we're an instruction-heavy organization, as it should be, right? You can see here, close to 70% of our dollars go to instruction, about 8% to debt service, the rest to technology operations, transportation, administration, et cetera. You can see most of the resources that we do invest in the school go right where you think it should go, which is to instruction and to the kids. And because of that, it's obvious follow-up to that most of our costs are also people costs. We're a people-heavy business. Close to 73.5% of our spend is for salaries and benefits, and you can see operating expense makes up the bulk of the remainder at about 16%. So with that, I'll quickly turn it back to Tim, but just to reiterate once more, the top priority as we see it, and as Dr. Doherty has expressed already, is really addressing teacher decompression, and we'll look for all the help we can get to ensure that we meet that need. Thank you.
7:15, right on the dot. Well done, Mr. Meister. Thank you very much. We're going to jump right into the questions. Again, we had questions that were submitted to us through our Google form that we included in our messaging to parents and the community earlier this week. And we've also been monitoring our social media feed, and I've got about 4 pages worth of questions written down there too. We're going to start off with our 2 board members real quick first, Ms. Heffron and Ms. Haynes. One of the pre-submitted questions comes from Carrie in the Midlothian district, and she's asked what your budget priorities are in this budget.
Thanks, Tim. Well, thanks for the question. My top two priorities for this budget are addressing the needs of our diverse community of learners and addressing teacher salary decompression. Although I have to say, I don't know that these are two separate items. For me, our students are going to thrive with teachers that are well compensated. It's a symbiotic relationship, and it's all of those pieces have to work together. You know, we're going to be going into post-COVID learning, and I think Dr. Dougherty mentioned this. You put it really well, that you know, these kids are going to be coming back after 10 months, and they're going to need a lot of social emotional learning wraparound support. We're going to, you know, I anticipate that we will see students who are going to need, I don't want to say remediation or, you know, help in those learning gaps. And it's incumbent on our division to meet those needs and to fill those gaps for those students. And, you know, decompressing the teacher salary we have an opportunity to correct 13 years of salary, of not adequately or appropriately compensating our teachers. And we have an opportunity to correct that. And I'll say it again, if we don't do this, if we can't land that in our budget, I will be very, very disappointed.
Oh, there you go. So I think as our kids come back very soon, we have to acknowledge that some of those kids have maintained their services, their therapy services, other mental health services. Some of those kids have had a tutor since they left school last March. Some of those kids have learned in wonderful environments where they have had Montessori teachers aiding them in their instruction. And other kids have had very different situations. Maybe they're at home and their learning is being supervised by their senior, their high schooler brother. So I think my number one concern is meeting all of those needs so that our kids move forward together. And we do that by funding decompression, because having an excellent teacher in front of that classroom to meet those needs is how you start. Differentiated staffing, because as I mentioned, different schools have families that are in different situations. And offering the mental health services, the speech therapy services, it is going to look a little bit different school to school. And then the third piece of meeting those needs is the differentiated funding. And that's because I think it's important to recognize, and I think I know this from having sat in on many PTA meetings in many different schools with the different financial pictures, that extras are met in some schools that have large PTA budgets with $40,000 left on the bottom line, and other schools are looking at $1,000 and wondering what they can do with that and how they can best meet a long list of needs. So differentiated funding, make sure that we can, again, meet the needs in all schools and move our students in all schools forward together.
Thank you, Ms. Haynes. I'll stay with the two board members for the next question. You've both addressed wanting to increase staff compensation and tackle a decades-long issue, and then provide equitable supports for our students. David wants to know what he can do to voice his support, what we can do as a community to voice the community support for this budget increase. What would you all suggest residents do?
I think that one, you should start sharing the story at your school. I think it's important for us to talk about the fact that some schools have PTA budgets that are very tiny, and other schools have PTA budgets that are very large, because that helps people understand the need for differentiated funding and what that means. I also think that you should reach out to your board of supervisors and tell your personal story of your experience at your school and what your school needs. I think that maybe schools don't always do the best job of telling our story. And when you tell that story, then I think it's an easy sell. And I think we're going to figure out how to do this together. So reach out and tell your story of why it's so important to fund a first-class education in Chesterfield County Public Schools.
I will echo that sentiment. I think that engagement is key. We need to hear from you. I actually have a part of a statement that I'd prepared, that my challenge is for everybody in the Clover Hill District to hop on the website, review the budget, and send me your priorities. Tell me what your priorities are, what matters to you. We can advocate for that at the school board level. But like Ms. Haynes said, you also need to reach out to our appropriating body, the Board of Supervisors, and let them know what's important to you, and engage with them with the same passion that we've been seeing from county residents throughout this past year. So please just let your elected officials and your leaders in Chesterfield and your leaders at the state level know that funding schools is really important to you.
Thank you, Ms. Heffron. Dr. Taylor, I'm going to jump over to you because there's a couple of questions coming up about the salary study. And as the Deputy Superintendent who oversees human resources and talent management, you seem best suited to answer that. There's a little back and forth going on, and I think we've got it squared away on our social media chat. But there's some folks talking about the pay raise and the health insurance increase. First, let's clarify what the pay raise range may be percentage-wise for the teacher salary study, and acknowledge that everybody at least will get 2%. And then there was some concern that the 5% increase that's budgeted for the school division's healthcare cost might actually result in not having a raise. Can you clarify all of that for us?
Absolutely. And first things first, I would highly recommend that everybody, if you haven't already done so, to visit mychesterfieldschools.com and to download this PDF. It is an outline of our budget, and it goes through a lot of the major budget initiatives that we've talked about this evening, and it also covers in great detail the salary study and has a couple of hot links in there that we highly recommend that folks go to. And that's a great question, and I'm glad that brought up. The net positive impact will be, the net impact for all employees will be positive in terms of balancing out healthcare costs versus a salary increase. So I'll talk about healthcare costs first. Every year, our healthcare costs, at least for the better part of the last decade, have gone up in some way, shape, or form. And that cost that has gone up has been split between employees and employer. What we are programming in the budget is the employer share. That's the share that the school system will pick up, not the employee. And it's not a percentage that would negate your salary increase, but rather a percentage on the healthcare plan that you as an employee selected. So that is going to vary based on the employee, the healthcare program that you chose as an employee, whether it's the HSA or a different plan. In terms of percentages that you could expect to see, I thought I'd clarify just a couple of points. This is not all employees that were studied in the salary study. We have a little over 8,000 full-time employees and a couple of extra thousand part-time employees on top of that. So there's nearly 10,000 people in our organization from an employee standpoint that serve children in our community. And only 5,300 of the 8,300 full-time employees were studied. And of that 5,300 employees that were studied, only 4,700 of those were on what we would call a teacher salary or teacher salary scale variant. So the majority of the folks that were studied in this salary study were teachers. As a matter of fact, 4,700 of them have that teacher pay scale, and that's why we chose to highlight that in the bulletin that you can download online. So it's a great tool for you to see where you are in terms of your years of experiences to step on this salary scale, and you can see where you would be based on your current salary, which is likely not accurately reflected because it's been compressed over the past several years that you've been with us, but more importantly, where you would be in the salary scale if it were adopted. For many folks, that would be somewhere between 2 and 9%, depending on where you land in the salary scale, which is a significant jump. And that is what we wanted to highlight for folks, is that it is a pretty significant investment back into our workforce. As Mr. Meister pointed out, and Dr. Doherty has reiterated a number of times, this salary study is implemented in 3 parts for the positions that were studied. The first year is to decompress our salaries. The second and third year is to bring us to a more competitive place in the marketplace. So it doesn't just end with decompression. It's decompression this year, and then beyond that, making our salaries more competitive in the marketplace so that we attract the very best to come to Chesterfield County and we keep the very best, and that they don't look elsewhere for their employment.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. And for those interested in learning more about the salary study, the recommendations, and how we are proposing to implement the recommendations, we would encourage you to tune into the school board's next budget work session, which is Tuesday, February 2nd at 4 p.m. We will put a link on it to these social media channels, but you can watch it live on Comcast, on Verizon, and we will be streaming it live as well. A really in-depth presentation about not just why, but how and when. So we appreciate that answer, Dr. Taylor. Mr. Davis, I'm going to jump over to you real quick. The budget had some expenditures in it, an expenditure increase. Wendy has asked if we've looked at cost savings, and she specifically pointed out something like LED lights throughout our buildings. It's a short-term expense, but a long-term savings, she says. What types of things have we done in the operations arena to reduce costs over the past several years?
Thank you for that question, Wendy. Reduction of cost, one of the things I know that we've seen is a reduction in our utility cost. Our electric bill went down by about $1.5 million in the last 12 to 18 months. And some of that might be attributed to the fact that we didn't have students in the building, that they weren't as open as much. Obviously, we saved money in regards to our school bus operations. We've had fewer employees on board, which isn't the greatest news, but we've also saved money in terms of fuel and maintenance because, again, we've not been operating to the scale while the schools have been closed. We've continued to operate our Cohort 1 buses to take care of their special needs children, but that total mileage is going to be down this particular fiscal year. Other savings that we can achieve, the suggestion of LED lights is one of many that we've considered. We have taken some initiatives to COVID-proof, future-proof our buildings. Over 10,000 light switches have been changed to sensors that detect when someone is in the room or not. And that's in our classrooms, it's in our restrooms. We have gone, not only for efficiency, but for safety and the reduction of touch points to flushless valves on our toilets. And so we're looking at multiple initiatives such as that. We want to be efficient in operations. And frankly, there's areas where we do need to spend a bit more money. But what our real goal is to be as effective, safe, and as efficient as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Meister, a two-part question. We just talked about, have we looked at savings? Can you talk first about how we scrub our budget with each department to make sure that the costs are necessary? And then two, the second question that's come in from Christina that is somewhat aligned is the federal dollars that we received this year sound like we will be getting more next year. How would they play into any of this budget operation?
Awesome. Thank you for that question. That's a great one. Dr. Doherty talked a little bit about the broader budget process. One of the things that was part of that first piece that starts in November, honestly, it starts before that, it wraps up in November, is, as Tim alluded to, a detailed scrub of each of the various operational areas' budgets. So Mr. Davis was just talking about operational costs. We would take time and energy to walk through with each of his folks on his team what he spent the last several years, what he plans to spend this year on various activities, and make sure that those are, quite frankly, right size for what is happening now, whether it's energy efficiency, et cetera. So there is a pretty robust process. I mentioned operations. It happens with schools, everywhere else in the organization as well, where we go through line by line, item by item, and look at that. The one thing to remember, as I talked about earlier, is that we are really a people-heavy business. Close to 70% of our costs are in people. So the biggest, most important piece of the entire budgeting process as we scrub is to ensure that we've got our staffing correct. And Dr. Taylor does a fantastic job of working with HR and Dr. High, et cetera, on ensuring that we've got the people pointed to the most important tasks and where they should be. And as that's 70% of the budget, that is really where we spend the bulk of the time, and that other 30%, 20% if you exclude debt, because that's largely fixed, is spent really scrubbing each of those line items. And I will reiterate, while that's a really important exercise, as you start to chip away, the dollars there are meaningful, but the big moves are making decisions on people ultimately, because it is a people-heavy business. The second part of the question was related to federal dollars. We have received a fair amount of CARES dollars over the course of the year, and we allocated those to a number of really critical sort of COVID-centric activities, whether it be things like PPE or some of the light switches that Mr. Davis just talked about, instructional support for classroom, special ed, et cetera, HVAC equipment. That largely had an expiration date, at least until December 28th. It had an expiration date of December 31st on it, and we've largely been through most of that. Mr. Bullis is correct that there is some new monies coming. We've seen what that is likely to be from the federal government. We're still going through the application process for that. We expect it to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 million next year. We must keep in mind as we think about that dollars, much like the first set of CARES dollars, we need to be thinking about how do we ensure that we get over the one-time impacts of the pandemic first and foremost. I know Dr. Doherty has expressed sort of first and foremost, we must ensure a robust summer school program for the next at least couple years as a first and primary use of that dollar. We'll continue to look at this budget and make sure that there aren't any sort of what I'll call one-time items that we can look at that CARES money for as we sort of figure out all the rules and the application for it. So I think it is a really important piece of how Chesterfield County gets from FY22 to FY23 and beyond. We just need to be careful of not saying that 22 or whatever it winds up being of CARES dollars can just be plugged into this budget to reduce that budget deficit, because it really needs to be first and foremost focused on those unique needs within this pandemic.
Thank you, Mr. Meister. Dr. High, don't want to leave you out of the conversation. And the next question comes from, it's a combination of questions from a couple of residents in the Clover Hill District, Melissa and Nadine. They want to know how our operating budget supports special education services and what more we plan to do.
Okay. Thank you for the question. Everything that we budget goes toward all of our students, and we believe that the importance is making sure that they have a learning environment that supports all of their needs. Our special education population makes up about 12% of all CCPS students. and they are afforded the instructional resources of all of our students. But we do have some special programs that we provide for them, whether it's through software or electronic devices that are based on the needs of that student. Our IEP teams drive the goals of the instructional program for our special education students. So when that IEP team sits down and develops goals and strategies, we implement what is provided. So if there are ever concerns, then you should contact your principal and have those conversations with the IEP team to make sure that the needs are being met for our students. We, first and foremost, during COVID, have looked at ways to make sure that we have been able to provide for our cohort 1 students when they've been in person, as well as for our students when they've been virtually or in a hybrid setting. Because we believe that the teachers, through the virtual training that we provided to them, are able to meet the needs of all of our students.
Thank you, Dr. High. Mr. Davis, back over to you. The next question pertains to budget expenses regarding facilities in the event that we have to carry over some of our COVID protections into next year. There was a dollar amount in there for personal protective equipment. What other types of funding is available to support students in the event we still are living with some of the leftovers from COVID?
Thank you, Mr. Bullison. Fully understand why that question would be on everybody's mind. We're preparing for the long haul. We all would like to see this crisis, and it is a crisis, come to a conclusion. But the reality is, as the cases decline, I think it'll probably be gradually, and we will continue to have the need to do things such as have PPE for our employees. And as was mentioned, there was a placeholder of about $1 million that we've suggested for the operating budget. We do know that there's a good chance that some of the federal funding that Mr. Meister referred to would assist us in this matter, so we kind of are hoping for a little bit of insurance in the operating budget. In addition to PPE, we need cleaning supplies. You know, we found that one of our local vendors that all the schools reach out to get those chemicals and so forth that they need to clean our schools. We're using that stuff, and we're using it at a faster rate. So we expect to continue to buy those wipes, those cleaning supplies and chemicals, everything that's necessary to keep our buildings and our buses clean and to protect our employees and staff and our students. We talk about masks. Who knows how long we'll be wearing masks, whether it'll be 2 months from now or 12 months from now. But we've bought a sufficient number for students and staff, and I did say students. We have masks available at our school and on our buses for that day when perhaps a student forgets one or the cloth string breaks. So we're going to continue to have that stockpile of PPE, and I'm confident that funding will be available for the PPE and the cleaning supplies and everything we need to do to have the correct environment for safe schools in this post-COVID environment.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I appreciate you covering this year and in the future as well. Dr. Taylor, a couple of questions rolling back in around the salary study. Yvonne has asked if we are seeking to implement the whole study over the next 3 years, or is it possible that only part of it may be implemented?
Well, Yvonne, that's a great question, and I think that if we could look into the future, I think it's definitely the intent of this superintendent, Dr. Doherty, and the school board to pursue implementation of the full study. When the county contracted a third party to do this salary study, they did want to look at more than just decompression, because that is an issue that we've been faced for some time. They wanted to look at market competitiveness to see how Chesterfield stacks up along with some of the other school divisions, as you saw Mr. Meister highlight, that are equivalent to Chesterfield County. And so this does take an iterative process and look at how we can adjust salaries over the next several years to reach that goal and to become more market competitive. We will need to continue to invest in that area because the market will continue to change. And as we all know, inflation will be a factor that needs to be considered. Cost of living will be a factor that needs to be considered. And this is really just a beginning point. Not a one-year solution, for us to get to a place where we're not only adequately compensating our staff, but we're also making sure that we have a structure in place so that we never fall back into a situation where we have compressed salaries. It is also important that we note, and Mr. Meister pointed this out as well, that there really is a fourth phase to this, and that's the group of employees that were not studied. So we do need to address this completely. We do need to take a look at this salary study and take the advice of independent third-party folks who have studied this and is their profession to look at salary and compensation and to take their advice to heart and implement this fully.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. I'm going to take a minute to clarify also, because we did have a question earlier. We keep talking about the comparisons between school divisions. And Wendy asked earlier if these were straight dollar-to-dollar comparisons and or how we developed who we were comparing ourselves against. And I guess probably as the person who's been here the longest, I'll take a crack at that, or you want to do it?
Yeah, I'll be happy to.
Great.
Wendy, that's a great question. And one of the things that we'd like to point out in the slides that you saw is we tried to distill this down to an apples-to-apples comparison versus trying to just look at the total budgets of these school systems. I mean, if you're like me or really anyone sitting around this table, you see $700 million and you think, oh my gosh, it's time to play the Powerball or something like that. These are ridiculous sums of money, just huge sums of money. But this is what it costs for 10,000 employees to serve over 60,000 children in our communities. And when you look at our neighboring school systems, they're of different sizes, so they do have different budgets. So one of the ways that we measure them is we measure them by what it costs to educate one student. So you see this comparison called a per pupil allocation or a per pupil expenditure, and that is the number that we're benchmarking against. Now, we have lots of different funding categories. Our most dominant funding category, as it should be, is instruction. And as you saw in that bar graph, we were third from the bottom in instruction. But you see that that is where we invest our resources, and it's quite clear. In recent years, we've made significant investments to make our transportation department the best in the Metro Richmond area and competitive throughout the state. And you see that that has grown over time, and that's really exciting. We had a question last night that asked, are we allocating our funds in the right places? Well, I would turn you to our pamphlet where you would see, just by opening to the first page, you see that breakdown of how we allocate our funds. And we've got 15.9% of our budget is keeping the lights on, keeping our buses on the road. 8% goes to debt to pay off the mortgage, more or less, for the school buildings that we have that we construct. And then 74% goes to salary and benefits. So we're investing our money in the places where it matters most, in our people. Some people say, well, gosh, you have a lot of folks over there at the central office. But as Mr. Meister showed you on his slide, compared to other school divisions and compared to the state, we're near half of what the infrastructure might look like in terms of support for teachers in other places. And that's an area where we really could grow. And so to give you that apples to apples comparison, we try to break it down to what it would cost per student. And we hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Just to add on a little bit to that, back in 2009, our school division underwent or participated in the Virginia School Efficiency Review Program. That was back in the housing market crisis, and it was designed to help school divisions look at where they could cut or save funds to make sure that the money stayed in the classroom. It looks like our school division has always been close to the bottom in these spending categories, because there were 21 fiscal recommendations in that report, 10 that would save money and 11 that called for our school division to actually spend more. So it seems like we've always been fighting that battle to meet the needs of our students. Next question is going to go to our two school board members. And Aaron has brought up an astute point. This is a 3-year implementation of the salary study. Year 3 might be a point in time when there might be new members on our school board, new members on other boards. What would you say to other elected officials who come along after you all, whether it's in 3 years, 7 years, 12 years? What would you say to them about why it's important to do this?
That's a really great question. Decompressing the salary is not, it's not a short-term solution. It's, and it's a long-term investment. You know, when we are able to attract new and retain our existing talented teachers for beyond that 10 to 15 year timeline, we are building equity in our schools. We are building, I'm using equity in the term of, we're building value, right? We're, you know, so ultimately that value transfers to our community at large, right? So that we all benefit from having these phenomenal teachers who are teaching our students to become amazing citizens. You know, I think that this is something, investing in our teachers is something I can't imagine anybody opposing that and being able to lead this community. You know, Chesterfield being so passionate about our schools. So, you know, I think that would be my advice to any incoming leadership would be that, you know, this is where the smart money is.
Sorry. I guess I would just add on to that, that it's also a morale issue, that I think being a teacher is a really, it can be a really difficult job. I don't think that I could do it. And to do a tough job and also not be properly compensated when you're an expert in your field. I think our teachers have done this for a long time, and you come to your breaking point, and that's where we are. And I would imagine that the people who would come after us would just understand that for the morale of the district, to ensure that that teacher can stand up in front of that classroom and know that she is valued by her constituents. I can't imagine that the work would not continue.
Thank you, Ms. Haynes. Dr. High, Ms. Haynes was speaking earlier about how we need to balance out supports for schools so that we don't have to rely on PTAs and some being able to do more than others. When we look at differentiated funding, that brings up the question, and as chief of schools, you oversee school administration. You've had conversations with principals. What will we be looking at with the differentiated funding for schools, and then how might they use it for staff as well?
Okay. So really with the differentiated funding for schools, they're looking at what are their needs, what are the needs of their school population. Depending on the population that they serve, it may be programs that they would use the differentiated funding. It could be with staffing. As Dr. Daugherty mentioned, ETRIC, and being able to make that great achievement, and within 2 years, this differentiated funding would allow schools to do that and be able to really pinpoint the needs of what their community needs and what their staff needs. Our principals work hard every day, and they know their students, they know their staff, and they know their community. And so with knowing all of that, they will be able to figure out what is best for them and what programs they put in place for that.
Thank you, Dr. High. Keep your light on because I'm coming right back down to you.
Okay.
The next question, a different Erin from a different magisterial district, but she's getting deeper into instruction and wants to know why there aren't additional funds for textbooks, either digital or hard copy.
Probably over a decade, there was a decision through the strategic plan to move away from textbook to more digital curriculum. And that is in alignment with the VDOE and what they have been asking or recommending for schools to do. And so in creating digital textbooks, we have, things are more up to date. We'll be able to, in our history and other areas, the information that students are able to receive are up to date. Also, we know that there are some areas that we do need textbooks in AP and IB, so those are credentialing requirements that we do still purchase textbooks for. This is an instructional decision, not necessarily a financial decision. Again, it aligns with our VDOE, and the quality learning applications really makes for a strong learning management system, as well as we have put an investment in our electronic devices through our Chromebooks. And so being able to put the devices in the students' hands and have them be able to access the information 24/7. Hopefully they don't access it 24/7, but whenever they need it and how they need it.
Thank you, Dr. High. Appreciate that.
They do sometimes.
Just as a time check for the folks up here on the panel, we've got about 10 minutes left. We know that we want to be respectful of individuals' time. They've been with us this evening, and we're sure that they have things to do as well. We appreciate you taking time to join us. Dr. Taylor, we'll have a couple more questions left, and they keep coming back to the salary study.
That's great.
We'll do that, and then we'll give some closing remarks time. We have some folks who want simple clarification on who is involved in this salary, who was involved in this salary study, what groups of employees?
Absolutely. So again, we have a little over 8,000 full-time employees, and only 5,300 of those employees were actually studied. We highly recommend folks to click on to the salary study documents so that you can see for yourself. We have a comprehensive list within that document, and there's hot links in the budget pamphlet for you to take a look at. The largest group of folks in that salary study are folks that are tied to the teacher salary scale, and there's about 4,700 of our 8,000 employees that were in that group that are some kind of variation, and I'll read some of the job titles just so that you have a glimpse. 4,100 of those employees are classroom teachers. Another 150 have the title of school counselor, librarian. So we have some folks that are speech therapists, special education coordinators, instructional designers, reading specialists, deans of students, school counseling coordinators, family life educators, diagnosticians, intensive day coordinators, IB staff, student wellness integrators, vocational assessment folks, nurses, and the list goes on. We studied them as the primary group. Again, 4,700 of those employees were in that group that was studied. And an additional subset of folks that were working out of schools or working in schools, like assistant principals and principals, were in that group as well. The folks that were not studied include folks like our transportation department, our technology department, our central office staff, and our school nutrition staff. They were not part of the salary study, and we've separated them out as a separate line item with a projected 2% raise, and they are in the fourth phase of our salary compensation plan.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. So as we begin to close up, just to summarize, all of the folks who were in the salary study appear to be school-based individuals?
That's correct. The focus of this salary study was on school-based employees, the ones that interact on a day-to-day basis with our teachers and our students and our parents on a regular basis, and that was the focus.
Thank you. And again, as Dr. Taylor referenced earlier, all of this information is available on mychesterfieldschools.com, the school division's website. We have the 12-page overview. We have the 107-slide presentation in case you want to see what you missed from Mr. Meister's presentation earlier. And of course, we have these budget presentations that will be available for folks who were not able to join us online tonight. With about 5 minutes left, I want to give our two board members a chance to give some closing thoughts to tonight's meeting.
Thanks, Tim. So I attended Chesterfield County Public Schools. I walked through Gordon Elementary School doors for kindergarten in 1981, and I walked across the stage at Monacan High School to get my degree, my diploma, in 1994. And our per pupil allocation as it is right now for my 3 students who currently attend CCPS schools is the same that I got in 1994. So I think that it's time for us to update that. I think it's time for us to look at how we can best serve our students. How we can, our county does not look like it looked in 1994, and the needs of our students are not the same as they were. So, you know, I think if we're going to move with the times, if we're going to acknowledge and recognize that instruction and putting students first is our priority, then we need to put our money where our mouth is. And the per pupil differentiated per pupil allocation is to me absolutely critical part of meeting our goals of meeting our student needs. But as I mentioned in the beginning, another part of that, meeting student needs, is not separate from fairly compensating our teachers. This decompression is an opportunity to make things right, to finally, after 13 years since the Great Recession, to acknowledge that we have recovered economically, and that as a municipality, we can make this right for our teachers as well. There's no reason for us to keep our head in the sand and say that we're living in 2008. We have the means, we have the opportunity, and it's an investment in our, not just our teachers, but it's an investment in our students and ultimately an investment in our community.
First, I want to say that while not everybody on this board agrees on everything, I'm really proud that all 5 of us are united around the issue of decompression and are willing to make hard cuts, even looking at things that might be some of our personal interests, in order to come together to make decompression work. I also want to say that back in March, when schools closed, I remember asking staff, because one of the immediate needs that came to mind is that some students would not be able to access an online curriculum because we didn't have Chromebooks in the hands of every student yet. And I worried about students who did not have parents at home to translate a package from English into their language. And so I asked staff, I said, we need to get these packets translated. And I was told that we did not have the money because we had $20,000 in our translation budget. In Chesterfield County, which is a rather affluent county, we had $20,000. And this is just one of many examples. It really struck me. And what I learned later is that a district of our size, with our number of English language learners, a better budget would be $80,000 to $100,000. So if we are going to say that your zip code should not define your education, and not have it be merely a campaign slogan, but something that's real that we can accomplish here. If we are going to say that all of our special education students can access the excellent curriculum that this district has to offer, if we are going to say that we will meet the growing mental health needs that many of our constituents have pointed out numerous times as we've navigated the return to school, then we're going to have to pay for it and fully invest in our schools. So I look forward to doing that together.
Thank you, Ms. Haynes, Ms. Heffron. Dr. Doherty, this is your proposed budget at this point, and the last question is going to go to you. You've been very pointed and very straightforward about this budget process and about what you would consider a success and a failure. It's been noted by several of the folks who have been involved in the ongoing chat on YouTube and Facebook tonight. We tried to address teacher compensation last year. It's back on the table this year. folks are looking for a reason to believe why it's not lip service. Why is this so important to you?
Well, thanks for the question. I felt a little lonely over here. Last night I got a lot of questions. Not everybody else got a chance to speak, so no, just kidding you, Tim. Great question. You know, a quote from Solomon Ortiz says that education is the key to success in life, and teachers make a lasting impact in the lives of our students. And the amazing thing is that it was true. Last year we submitted a budget. It was 99, almost $100 million. And what came out of last year's budget request was a study. And the study showed that we were accurate in what our predictions were. And we appreciated the Board of Supervisors and the county executive paying for the study and saying, let's look at this. The opportunity for us now is saying, this is our budget. This is our budget. If we do not meet priority one, we have failed our children. We have failed our teachers. We have failed the citizens and the residents of Chesterfield County. It's not that people who look at the budget say, no, this is an inaccurate statement. It is a very true statement. It is a very accurate scale that we are underpaying teachers. I do believe the Board of Supervisors and the county see this as a priority that we have. Our responsibility is to make sure that it stays number one in the priority through their budget process in March and April. And our residents can help us here. We're not asking for other things that are in priority one. Priority one, a very important issue for us. And I don't blame our teachers and staff members for thinking, well, you tried last year and failed. But last year we were able to increase a great deal of staff members in our schools and meet the needs of our schools for staffing. This year we're saying, please listen to us. Please listen to us. The success and future of Chesterfield County Public Schools rest on the success of this budget and this budget request over the next 3 years. All I can do is my very best to show people the need, and hopefully people will join the Chesterfield team and say, you're correct, and let's work together to make sure that our teachers are well compensated.
Thank you, Dr. Doherty. Dr. Doherty, Ms. Heffron, Ms. Haynes, to our panelists, thank you for taking time out of your night tonight to join us. I assume we're running towards a closing point because I'm hearing vacuums starting to run in the background, which I guess means it's time for us to leave. To our residents in Chesterfield County, we appreciate you all taking time tonight to join us for this discussion. Our goal is to provide you with information necessary to make an informed decision about how you support public education in Chesterfield County. We've laid out some very compelling arguments and some compelling data, and now it's up to us as a community to have an important discussion about the funding that's necessary to run a high-quality school division. And so we hope that you'll continue to engage with us over the next 5 weeks, share your thoughts with our school board members as they prepare to approve and ultimately adopt a spending plan that will fund Chesterfield County Public Schools for the 2021-22 school year. As always, we do appreciate your time joining us here tonight. We appreciate your continued support of Chesterfield County Public Schools. Have a great evening.